She fought to resist, but his overwhelming presence ignited a fire within her, a dangerous pull threatening her carefully guarded world. Hello and a warm welcome, amazing viewers. I'm your storyteller, Morgan, and I hope this message finds you well. Before we dive into this incredible journey, if you crave stories where real love blossoms in the most unexpected places, where a single glance can unravel lifetimes of control, you're in the right place. Prepare for a soul-stirring tale of forbidden connection and transformative passion. To experience every breathtaking moment of this love story that defies boundaries, be sure to watch until the very end. You won't want to miss a heartbeat. It's going to be unforgettable. If you haven't yet, please take a moment to subscribe, and let's uncover this captivating secret together. Chapter 1. The city below Elias Thorne's penthouse was a sprawling circuit board at dawn, veins of light pulsing with the first surge of commuters. Up here in the area of polished steel and glass, silence reigned absolute, broken only by the metronomic tick-tock of the antique chronometer on his minimalist desk. Elias stood before the floor-to-ceiling window, a silhouette etched against the awakening metropolis. 48 years old, he was a man carved from glacial ice and tempered steel. His reflection in the glass was familiar, sharp jawline taut, icy blue eyes scanning the horizon, not with wonder, but with cold assessment. A charcoal suit, flawlessly tailored, was his armor. Control wasn't just a habit, it was the oxygen he breathed, the architecture of his existence. Emotion, a dangerous contaminant, meticulously excised years ago. Life was a series of solved equations, predictable, efficient, sterile as the penthouse itself. The air hummed with the subdued purr of climate control, calibrated to a precise 20 degrees Celsius. The scent was ozone, expensive polish, and the faint sterile tang of filtered air, the olfactory signature of absolute control. Concrete floors, cool underfoot, stretched towards walls of exposed steel beams. Furniture was sparse, geometric, devoid of ornamentation. A single, severe black sofa faced the view. A monolithic desk held a single, sleek terminal. It was less a home, more a command center overlooking his dominion. Thorne Industries, a leviathan in renewable energy tech. His morning routine was a sacred ritual. Black coffee brewed precisely to 92 degrees, consumed standing at the window. The bitter liquid was fuel, not pleasure. He reviewed overnight reports on a tablet, the glow reflecting in his impassive eyes. Every movement was economical, devoid of waste. He existed within self-imposed lines, sharp and unyielding. The disruption arrived at precisely 8 a.m., announced by the discreet chime of the private elevator. Mrs. Henderson, his previous housekeeper of 15 stoic years, had retired. The agency promised exceptional efficiency. Elias expected another version of Mrs. Henderson, silent, gray blending into the architecture. Amara Ellis stepped out of the elevator, and the sterile air seemed to flinch. Elias, turning from the window, felt the first faint fissure in his icy composure. It wasn't anything overt, she was simply present. Early 30s, he estimated, possessing a beauty that was both striking and unsettlingly serene. Her skin was the rich, warm tone of polished mahogany, luminous even in the penthouse's cool light. Her dark eyes, large and framed by thick lashes, held a quiet intelligence and a calm that felt alien in his high-pressure world. She wore a simple, well-kept cotton dress the color of summer wheat, and her hair was gathered in a thick braid that fell like a rope of obsidian silk down her back. She carried a single, worn but spotless canvas bag. Mr. Thorne, her voice was low, melodious, cutting through the hum of the air conditioning like a clear bell. Amara Ellis, from Sterling Domestic. He gave a curt nod, his gaze sweeping over her, an automatic assessment. Henderson's schedule is on the terminal in the utility room. Keys are there. You start now. His voice was clipped, devoid of warmth, a verbal extension of the room. Of course, Mr. Thorne. She met his gaze directly, unflinching, yet without challenge. A small, polite smile touched her lips, revealing a dimple in one cheek. It was disconcerting. I'll familiarize myself and begin immediately. As she moved past him towards the utility corridor, a scent followed her. Not perfume, something warmer, simpler, vanilla perhaps, and beneath it, the clean, sun-drenched smell of cotton dried outdoors. It was utterly foreign in his ozone-scented fortress. He watched the subtle sway of her hips beneath the simple dress, the quiet efficiency of her stride. There was a grounded grace to her movements, a natural rhythm that felt entirely out of place amidst the rigid geometry of his world. She paused at the entrance to the utility room, glancing back. Would you prefer the living area cleaned first, or the study? He hadn't considered it. Mrs. Henderson just did. The study. I'll be working there. He turned abruptly back to the window, dismissing her. Or trying to. Irrelevant noise, he told himself, forcing his attention to the cityscape. An asset. Ensure she performs her function efficiently. That is all. But the scent of vanilla and sunshine lingered, a ghost in the sterile air. He retreated to his study, a glass-walled enclosure overlooking the main living space. He booted up his terminal, the screens flooding with data streams, market fluctuations, project timelines, the complex, predictable language of his world. Yet, his focus splintered. Through the glass he could see Amara moving in the living area. She worked with a silent, unhurried competence. There was no wasted motion, only a focused calm. She dusted the stark surfaces, her capable hands moving with surprising gentleness over the cold steel and glass. When she reached up to wipe the top of a tall bookshelf holding only a few severe art books, the hem of her dress lifted slightly, revealing a smooth, strong calf. The light from the eastern window caught the curve of her neck as she bent to polish the low coffee table, gilding the warm skin in gold. He noticed the texture of her braid, thick and heavy, the way a few tiny tight coils had escaped near her temples. He found himself tracking her progress, his eyes drawn away from the glowing screens. It was intrusive, annoying. He clenched his jaw, forcing his gaze back to a complex financial projection. Focus, Thorne. She is background static. Minutes later, a soft swish of her dress sounded closer. She was cleaning the glass wall of his study from the outside. She didn't look in, entirely absorbed in her task, buffing the already pristine surface with a soft cloth. Her reflection in the glass was superimposed over his terminal screen. The focused line of her brow, the slight part of her lips as she concentrated, the rhythmic rise and fall of her shoulders. He could see the faint pulse at the base of her throat. A surge of irritation, hot and unwelcome, flared within him. This was unacceptable distraction. He stood up sharply, the sudden movement causing her to pause and glance towards him, her expression politely questioning. Is there a problem, Mr. Thorne? Her voice was calm, cutting through his internal turbulence. He hadn't intended to summon her. He needed space. No. Continue. The words came out harsher than intended. He strode past her towards the kitchen, needing water, needing to break the strange tension coiling in the air between them. He felt hyper-aware of her proximity as he passed, the subtle warmth radiating from her body, the faint scent of her soap, clean, herbal, intensifying for a fleeting moment. In the kitchen, all chrome and cold stone, he poured ice water. He heard the soft hum from the living area again. Not a tune, just a low, resonant vibration in her throat, almost imperceptible. Mrs. Henderson had never hummed. This felt alive. He crushed the thought, the ice clinking violently against the glass. The days settled into a new, uneasy rhythm. Amara was indeed efficient. The penthouse gleamed with an almost aggressive cleanliness. She was quiet, unobtrusive, yet her presence was a constant low-level disruption to Elias's equilibrium. He found himself structuring his movements around hers, a subconscious dance of avoidance and observation. He'd delay leaving his study until he heard her vacuuming in a distant bedroom. He'd time his coffee refill for when she was polishing the dining table. One Tuesday morning, entering the stark dining area, a long slab of black marble on steel legs, he stopped dead. In the center of the immaculate surface, where nothing had ever resided except perhaps a forgotten report, stood a single perfect gardenia, in a simple cylindrical glass vase. It was shockingly white against the black, its petals lush and velvety, curving in soft feminine whirls. And the scent, it hit him like a physical force, heady, intoxicatingly sweet, floral and deeply alive. It flooded the sterile space, an olfactory invasion. Elias stared at it. A jolt, sharp and electric, went through him. Part fury, who authorized this frivolity, and part something else, a dangerous, unwelcome pull. It was beautiful, undeniably, vulnerably beautiful, an assault on the straight lines and controlled angles of his existence. He didn't remove it. He stood there, frozen, breathing in the alien perfume, his gaze fixed on the impossible softness of the petals. He could almost feel their texture beneath his fingers. The thought startled him, a physical recoil tightening his shoulders. Ridiculous, sentimental garbage. He forced himself to turn away, retreating to the perceived safety of his study. But the gardenia remained. Its scent permeated the air, a constant fragrant reminder of the intrusion, and it opened a floodgate. Now, he noticed everything. The lingering warmth on the chrome handle of the refrigerator where her hand had rested moments before. The faint, almost ghostly scent of vanilla and sunshine that clung to the sofa cushions after she'd vacuumed. The subtle indentation her weight left on the rug near the window where she paused briefly to look out. The specific way she arranged his discarded coffee cup on the cleaning tray, handle aligned just so. The quiet melody, barely audible, that sometimes drifted from the laundry room, a folk tune perhaps, or a hymn, hummed low and resonant. One afternoon, he emerged from a tense video conference needing solitude. He walked towards the rarely used solarium, a glass box overlooking a small neglected terrace. As he approached the open door, he heard it, her humming, clearer here. He paused just out of sight. She was watering a cluster of small resilient succulents she must have brought, another silent rebellion against the sterility. She was bent over them, her braid falling over one shoulder, the late afternoon sun turning her skin to molten gold. She touched a plump leaf gently, her expression soft, absorbed. A small genuine smile played on her lips. The sight struck Elias with unexpected force. It wasn't just her beauty, though that was undeniable. It was the innocence of the gesture, the simple, unguarded pleasure in nurturing something living. It radiated from her, a warmth that seemed to push against the penthouse's inherent coldness. He felt a confusing twist in his gut, part longing, part resentment at the intrusion of such simple, uncomplicated feeling into his complex, controlled world.
Oh.
He must have made a sound, a slight shift of his weight on the polished floor. Her head snapped up, the smile vanishing, replaced by polite neutrality. "Mr. Thorne, I was just tending to these. I hope it's all right." The terrace seemed lonely. He stared at her, at the tiny plants, at the vulnerability she'd so quickly masked. His usual command of language deserted him. "They require minimal maintenance," he stated, his voice sounding unnaturally stiff even to himself. "See that they do not become untidy." It was a ridiculous thing to say. He turned on his heel and walked away, feeling her gaze on his back, adding another layer to the unspoken tension thickening the air. Days later, he found himself deliberately walking past the utility room as she was leaving for the day. She was pulling on a light cardigan over her dress. She looked up, surprised. "Finished for the day, Mr. Thorne?" "No." He paused, searching for a reason for his presence. "The gardenia. It requires water." The words felt clumsy, foreign. A flicker of something, amusement, understanding, passed through her dark eyes. "I changed it this morning, Mr. Thorne. It should be fine." She hoisted her canvas bag. "Unless you'd prefer a different flower." The question felt loaded. "Yes, no. Get rid of it. Keep it forever." "It is adequate," he managed, his jaw tight. "Good night, Miss Ellis." "Good night, Mr. Thorne." She offered that small polite smile again and stepped into the elevator. As the doors slid shut, he caught the faintest trace of her scent: vanilla, sunshine, and something uniquely her. He stood alone in the sudden heavy silence. The penthouse felt cavernous, emptier than it ever had before. Mrs. Henderson retired. The sterile air pressed in, but now it was laced with ghosts, the scent of gardenia, the echo of her hum, the memory of sunlight on her skin, the phantom warmth where her hand might have rested. The impenetrable fortress felt breached. An unseen intruder had slipped past his defenses,
not with force, but with quiet grace and the unbearable sweetness of a single white flower. The equations of his life were no longer solving. A dangerous forbidden variable had been introduced, and Elias Thorne, master of control, had absolutely no idea how to contain it. The stillness was no longer empty, it was charged, waiting. The storm, silent and internal, had begun to gather.
Chapter 2. The gardenia persisted. Its waxy white petals, deceptively delicate against the black marble, became a silent accusation, a fragrant lodestar in Elias Thorne's sterile universe. He couldn't bring himself to order its removal, yet its presence was a constant low-grade fever under his skin. The heady scent mingled treacherously with the phantom traces of vanilla and sunshine that seemed to cling to every surface. Amara Ellis touched, long after she'd moved to another part of the penthouse fortress. His attempts to reassert control were meticulous, almost military. He adjusted his schedule with ruthless precision, aiming to minimize overlap. He'd rise earlier, ensuring his coffee ritual was complete before her 8 a.m. arrival chime. He'd schedule back-to-back virtual meetings in his study, the glass wall offering a cruel panoramic view of her movements, a silent ballet of efficiency that held him captive. He'd work late, long past the time her soft footsteps signaled her departure, filling the echoing space with the cold hum of electronics and the relentless ticking of the chronometer, trying to purge the lingering warmth of her presence. It was a futile campaign. The fortress was breached. Awareness of her was a creeping vine, insidious and tenacious, winding through the cracks in his glacial composure. He found himself cataloging details with the obsessive focus he usually reserved for hostile takeover bids. The way sunlight, streaming through the eastern windows mid-morning, turned the tiny escaped coils of hair near her temples into halos of spun bronze against her warm skin. The defined muscle in her bare forearm as she stretched to dust the top frame of the vast living room window, the cotton sleeve of her dress slipping back, the quiet thump-thump of her pulse visible at the base of her throat when he passed her unexpectedly in the hallway, a narrow space suddenly charged with static electricity. Once retrieving a forgotten file from the rarely used guest room, he'd found her meticulously making the bed. She hadn't heard him. He watched, frozen in the doorway, as she smoothed the duvet cover with capable hands, a small unconscious smile touching her lips as she plumped a pillow. The simple domesticity of it, the unguarded contentment, struck him with the force of a physical blow. He'd retreated silently, his own breath tight in his chest, fury warring with a bewildering ache. The silence between them thickened, becoming a tangible thing. It wasn't the comfortable quiet he'd shared with Mrs. Henderson. This silence vibrated with unspoken currents. He'd catch her gaze flickering towards him when he thought she was absorbed in her work, a quick, assessing look he couldn't decipher. He became hyper-aware of his own body in her proximity, the involuntary clenching of his jaw, the way his knuckles whitened when he gripped the edge of his desk as she cleaned the glass nearby, the sudden dryness in his mouth. He deliberately avoided eye contact, yet the space where their gazes didn't meet felt heavier, more significant than any direct look. His internal landscape became a battleground. Rationalizations were his first line of defense. She's efficient. The penthouse has never been cleaner. It's purely biological, an attractive woman in close proximity, a predictable chemical reaction. Manage it, control it. He'd repeat these mantras like incantations, staring at complex financial models until the numbers blurred. But beneath the icy logic, darker, more visceral impulses stirred. Fantasies, unwanted and vivid, would intrude during moments of intense concentration. The imagined texture of her skin beneath his calloused fingertips, the surprising softness he suspected lay beneath her capable exterior, the weight and silk of her braid coiled in his palm. The shame that followed these unbidden thoughts was corrosive, a cold burn in his gut that only fueled his anger, at himself, at her for being the catalyst. He started taking punishingly cold showers in the morning, the water a physical shock meant to scour away the unwanted heat pooling low in his abdomen. One Wednesday, seeking refuge from a particularly grating conference call, He stalked into the kitchen for more ice water. Amara was there, polishing the vast expanse of the chrome refrigerator door. She glanced up as he entered, her expression politely neutral, but her eyes held a watchfulness that hadn't been there during her first week. "Trouble in the boardroom, Mr. Thorne?" she asked, her voice low and smooth. The question itself was innocuous, but the slight tilt of her head, the faint knowing curve at the corner of her mouth, it felt like a challenge. It was the first time she'd initiated conversation beyond the purely functional. He stopped, the ice clinking sharply in his glass. He fixed her with his iciest stare, the one that made junior executives stammer. "The boardroom is always trouble, Miss Ellis. It's designed that way." He kept his voice flat, devoid of inflection. She didn't flinch. Instead, she gave the chrome one last buff with her cloth, the action slow and deliberate. "Must be exhausting, constantly waging war." She met his gaze squarely, especially when the battlefield seems to follow you home. The observation, delivered with that deceptive calm, was like a dart finding a chink in his armor. It struck too close to the turmoil he was desperately trying to conceal. He felt a flash of heat rise up his neck. "My home," he stated, the words clipped, "is a sanctuary of order. Battles are contained elsewhere." He gestured vaguely towards the city view. Her gaze swept around the gleaming cold kitchen, the steel, the stone, the absolute absence of anything personal or warm. "Sanctuary," she repeated softly, almost to herself. She picked up her polishing spray and cloth. "It's certainly immaculate." She moved past him towards the dining area, the faint scent of her herbal soap lingering in her wake. It wasn't overtly flirtatious, but the subtle questioning of his environment, the hint of something missing beneath the perfection, felt like a form of intimate trespass. He stared after her, the ice in his glass melting unnoticed. The verbal skirmishes became a new dangerous element in their silent war. He found himself lingering, creating opportunities for them, drawn to the spark of challenge in her eyes despite himself. He discovered her one afternoon in his private library, a room lined with severe leather-bound volumes he rarely touched. She was carefully dusting the top shelves, standing on the small library ladder. He leaned against the doorframe, observing her. "Contemplating philosophy, Miss Ellis, or merely ensuring Kant remains dust-free?" She glanced down, a flicker of surprise in her dark eyes, quickly masked. "Just ensuring the spiders don't claim Hobbes for their own, Mr. Thorne," she replied, her voice steady. She descended the ladder with that innate grace, though I imagine Leviathan might appreciate the company. A dry, unexpected sound escaped him, almost a laugh, but choked off instantly. It startled them both. He cleared his throat. Hobbes understood the necessity of absolute power, order above all else. He stepped into the room, drawn towards her like a moth to a forbidden flame. She tilted her head, considering him. The late afternoon light slanted through the window, catching the gold flecks in her eyes. "Absolute power," she echoed. "It sounds lonely." She held his gaze for a heartbeat longer than necessary before turning back to her cart. "Does it ever get heavy, Mr. Thorne?" The crown, the question spoken softly, landed with the weight of an anvil. It pierced through the layers of control, touching the raw, unacknowledged weariness deep within him. Lonely, heavy, words he would never utter, concepts he denied existed in his perfectly calibrated existence. He felt exposed, vulnerable in a way he hadn't in decades. Anger surged, a protective reflex. "It's not a crown, Miss Ellis," he snapped, his voice harsher than intended. "It's responsibility, and it requires discipline, not sentiment." He turned abruptly and left the library, the taste of copper sharp in his mouth, the taste of his own lie. He avoided the penthouse that evening, working late at the Thorne Industries tower, the city lights sprawling below offering no solace. The image of her in the library, bathed in golden light, questioning the very foundation of his existence with a simple phrase, haunted him. "Does it ever get heavy?" The phantom scent of gardenia seemed to cling to his suit jacket. The tension escalated,
becoming a living entity within the penthouse walls. The air crackled when they occupied the same space. He found himself studying the curve of her lower lip as she concentrated on polishing silverware. The delicate shell of her ear partially revealed. When her braid shifted, the way her dress draped over the subtle swell of her hip, it was a relentless, torturous inventory. His dreams, when he managed to sleep, were fragmented, feverish things filled with the scent of vanilla and the imagined feel of warm, smooth skin beneath his hands. He'd wake tangled in sweat-damp sheets, disgusted and achingly aroused, the chronometers ticking sounding like a countdown to his own undoing. One Friday, she was cleaning his study while he was attempting to review a critical contract. He sat rigidly at his desk, the words swimming before his eyes, acutely conscious of her every movement. She was wiping down the bookshelves behind him. The soft whisk of her cloth, the faint rustle of her dress, the subtle shift in the air as she moved closer. He could feel the heat radiating from her body, smell the clean, warm scent of her skin mixed with the faint vanilla. It was intoxicating, unbearable. He needed to break the tension, to reassert some semblance of distance. He picked up a heavy crystal paperweight from his desk, a cold, perfect sphere. Without turning, he held it out slightly. "Miss Ellis, ensure this is adequately polished. It seems dull." It was a petty command, designed to reinforce the hierarchy, to remind them both of their places. He heard her pause behind him. Then, her hand reached out, her fingers brushing against his as she took the paperweight. The contact was brief, accidental, a mere grazing of skin, yet it detonated. An electric shock jolted up Elias's arm, searing through his nerves, straight to his core. His breath hitched, sharp and audible in the sudden absolute silence of the room. Every muscle in his body locked. He felt the warmth of her fingers, the slight roughness of her skin against his own. With shocking clarity, time seemed to distort, stretching the fraction of a second into an eternity. He sensed her freeze behind him. He could almost hear the sudden acceleration of her heartbeat, feel the startled tension vibrating in the air between them. The scent of her vanilla, sunshine, clean sweat from her work, flooded his senses, overwhelming the ozone and leather of his study. It was primal, intoxicating, a siren call to every suppressed instinct. Slowly, agonizingly he turned his head. She was standing close, too close, the paperweight clutched in her hand, forgotten. Her eyes were wide, dark pools reflecting the city lights and something else. Shock, yes, but also a dawning awareness, a vulnerability that mirrored his own turmoil. Her lips were slightly parted. He saw the rapid flutter of her pulse in the delicate hollow of her throat. The air between them was thick, charged, humming with the weight of everything unspoken, everything forbidden. His gaze locked onto hers. The icy blue of his eyes, usually so controlled, felt like fractured glass, revealing a glimpse of the raging inferno beneath. The carefully constructed walls of his discipline, the decades of rigid control, felt like they were crumbling into dust. The rationalizations, the fury, the shame, they were swept away in a single, devastating wave of pure, unadulterated want. It was terrifying in its intensity, a force of nature he could no longer deny or contain. He didn't move, he couldn't, but the look he gave her, stripped bare, hungry, consumed, was a surrender more profound than any action. It was the shattering of resolve. The forbidden fire, banked and denied for weeks, had erupted, consuming the careful distance, the professional boundaries, the impenetrable fortress of Elias Thorne. The paperweight, cold and heavy in her hand, was the only anchor in a room suddenly spinning off its axis. The silence screamed. The fire had taken hold, and there was no going back.
Chapter 3. The silence after the touch wasn't silence at all. It was a roaring void, filled with the deafening thud of Elias Thorne's own heartbeat hammering against his ribs. The frantic rush of blood in his ears, loud enough to drown out the city's distant hum. Amara stood frozen behind him, the cold weight of the crystal paperweight forgotten in her hand. Her gaze locked onto his with an intensity that mirrored the wildfire consuming him from within. The air in the study crackled, thick with ozone and the scent of her, vanilla sunshine, and the sharp, clean tang of her surprise. He saw it all reflected in her wide, dark eyes. The shock, the sudden, breathless awareness, the dawning comprehension of the chasm he'd just revealed. Her lips remained parted, a silent gasp captured in time, the rapid flutter of her pulse in her throat, a visible drumbeat against the smooth, warm column of her neck. The distance between them, mere inches, felt like an impossible gulf and an unbearable proximity all at once. Elias wrenched his gaze away first, a violent instinctive recoil. He surged to his feet, the chair scraping harshly against the polished concrete floor. He couldn't breathe. The walls of his glass-walled study felt like they were closing in, reflecting his own fractured composure back at him 100-fold. He needed space, air that wasn't saturated with the essence of her. "Leave," he rasped, the words scraping his throat raw. He didn't look at her, staring instead at the cold geometric lines of his terminal screen, seeing nothing but the imprint of her startled expression. Now, he heard her sharp intake of breath, the soft rustle of her dress as she moved. He braced himself for a question, a protest, anything. But there was only the sound of her retreating footsteps, quick and light, fading down the hallway. The faint scent of vanilla lingered, a ghostly accusation. The paperweight lay abandoned on the edge of his desk, catching the gray afternoon light. He stared at it, a symbol of his own pathetic attempt at control, now rendered meaningless. The touch replayed in his mind on a loop. The brief searing connection of skin, the jolt of pure electricity, the terrifying freefall into desire he'd barely arrested. He slammed his fist onto the desk, the impact jarring up his arm, a futile expression of the rage, warring with the raw, unquenchable need inside him. Weakness, dangerous, catastrophic weakness. The days that followed were an exercise in exquisite torture. Elias became a ghost haunting his own penthouse. He retreated further, working longer hours at the Thorne Industries tower, returning only when the deep silence of the late night assured him Amara was gone. He communicated via terse notes left on the terminal in the utility room. "Clean study last. Do not water plants on terrace. Replace library dust cloths." Each note felt like another brick in a crumbling wall. When their paths did cross, the air thickened instantly. He moved with rigid economy, his gaze fixed straight ahead or locked onto his tablet, a mask of glacial indifference firmly in place. But beneath the ice, the fire raged. He was hyper-aware of her every movement, every breath. The soft swish of her dress in another room sounded like thunder. The scent of her herbal soap drifting down the hallway was an olfactory ambush. He'd find traces of her presence, a misplaced cleaning cloth, the lingering warmth on a chair she'd dusted, and feel a fresh wave of that maddening forbidden heat. Amara, for her part, mirrored his distance. She moved with heightened efficiency, her gaze carefully averted, her usual quiet hum silenced. Yet he sensed a watchfulness in her, a quiet assessment. She didn't shy away, but navigated the charged space with a new careful precision. Once, entering the kitchen for coffee long after she should have been in the East Wing, he found her meticulously cleaning the espresso machine. She didn't startle, simply continued her task, her profile serene. "Persistent, aren't you, Miss Ellis?" he remarked, his voice deliberately cold, filling his cup. "That machine was serviced last week." She didn't look up, her focus on the gleaming chrome portafilter. "Even the most reliable things need tending, Mr. Thorne," she replied, her tone even. "Neglect can lead to unexpected eruptions." She slid the portafilter back into place with a soft, definitive click. "Wouldn't want your morning ritual disrupted by a malfunction." The double entendre hung in the air, subtle yet unmistakable. He felt his jaw tighten. She was speaking about the machine, and yet, she wasn't. It was a quiet defiance, a reminder of the tension simmering just beneath his enforced calm. He had no retort that wouldn't betray him further. He took his coffee and retreated, the taste of it suddenly bitter and unsatisfying. He tried to exorcise her presence. He ordered the gardenia removed. The next morning, A single perfect white orchid sat in its place on the black marble table. He found it during a pre-dawn prowl, the cool, exotic fragrance a silent rebellion. He left it there, a testament to his own unraveling will. One rain-lashed Thursday, seeking refuge from the oppressive atmosphere inside, Elias found himself drawn to the small glass-enclosed greenhouse adjoining the terrace. He rarely entered it. Mrs. Henderson had kept a few hardy, joyless ferns alive. Now, stepping inside was like entering a different world. Warm, humid air, thick with the scent of damp earth and greenery, enveloped him. Amara was there, tending to a vibrant array of plants she must have gradually introduced. Ferns with delicate fronds, flowering succulents in terracotta pots, even a small, glossy-leaved citrus tree. She wore a simple tunic over her dress, her braid draped over one shoulder, her brow furrowed in concentration as she pruned a trailing vine. He stood in the doorway, unnoticed, the drumming rain on the glass roof a cocooning sound. The sight of her here, in this pocket of unexpected life, surrounded by thriving green things, was profoundly disarming. The rigid lines of his world seemed to soften in the humid air. She looked up, sensing his presence, her expression guarded but not fearful. "Seeking sanctuary from the storm, Mr. Thorne?" she asked, wiping her hands on a cloth. Her voice was softer here, somehow fitting the verdant space. "There are storms everywhere, Miss Ellis," he replied, stepping further inside. The warmth was a physical shock after the penthouse's chill. He gestured vaguely at the thriving plants. "You seem determined to wage a campaign against sterility." She smiled faintly, a real smile that touched her eyes, making them spark like dark stars. "Life finds a way, Mr. Thorne, even in the most controlled environments." She picked up a small watering can. "Sometimes it just needs a little encouragement, and someone willing to get their hands dirty." She held his gaze for a beat, the challenge gentle but present. "Are you afraid of dirt, Mr. Thorne?" The question, playful yet probing, struck a nerve. He looked at her capable hands, the slight smudge of soil on her knuckle. "Dirt implies disorder, contamination," he stated, though the conviction felt hollow in this lush, vital space. "Or fertility," she countered softly, moving to water a cluster of vibrant purple flowers. "Nothing truly grows without it. Not plants, not anything else." She glanced back at him, her gaze steady, inviting him to understand. The air hummed, not just with the rain, but with the unspoken thing between them. He left the greenhouse without another word, the scent of damp earth and her subtle challenge clinging to him long after. The controlled environment felt even more suffocating. He found himself at the grand piano in the living area, a sleek black Steinway, another cold monument to status, untouched for years. He ran a finger over the dustless lid. "Life finds a way." Later that week, returning unexpectedly early from a cancelled meeting, Elias entered the penthouse to an unusual sound. A simple tentative melody drifted from the living area. Not a hum, but the clear single notes of the piano. He moved silently, drawn like a moth. Amara sat on the very edge of the piano bench, her back ramrod straight, her fingers hesitantly pressing the ivory keys. She was playing a simple haunting folk tune, her concentration absolute. The late afternoon sun streamed through the windows, bathing her in golden light, catching the rich tones of her skin, illuminating the focused line of her brow, the soft curve of her lower lip caught between her teeth in concentration. She looked unbearably young, vulnerable, and utterly absorbed. He stood in the shadows of the hallway, transfixed. This was the catalyst he hadn't known he was waiting for. The final illusion shattered. Not just an efficient employee, not just a beautiful woman who disturbed his peace, but a person, complex, talented, possessing hidden depths, and a quiet, resilient spirit that shone through the simple melody. He saw the focused intensity, the flicker of frustration when she fumbled a note, the small, triumphant smile when she got it right. He saw her humanity, radiant and undeniable, and it undid him completely. He must have made a sound. Her head snapped up, her hands freezing mid-chord. The music died abruptly. Her eyes widened, filled with a mixture of surprise and apprehension. She saw him watching, and a faint flush rose on her cheeks. She started to rise quickly. "Mr. Thorne,"
I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. Don't stop. The words were out before he could censor them, rough, almost pleading. He stepped into the living area, the vast space feeling suddenly intimate, charged with the remnants of her music and his own unraveling restraint. She remained seated, frozen, watching him approach. He stopped near the piano, close enough to see the rapid pulse beating in her throat, close enough to breathe in the scent of her vanilla, sunshine, and the faint clean smell of her skin. The silence stretched, taut and quivering. It was unexpected, he managed, his gaze fixed on her face, tracing the curve of her cheekbone, the soft arch of her eyebrow. You play, only a little, she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked down at her hands resting on the keys. My grandmother taught me. It's been years. She risked a glance up at him. I didn't think anyone would be home. Really? He said, the ghost of something that might have been amusement touching his voice, gone as quickly as it came. He reached out, his hand hovering near the polished wood of the piano. It wasn't unpleasant. It was a monumental understatement. The simple notes had resonated deep within his frozen core. A flicker of something, relief, daring, crossed her features. High praise indeed, Mr. Thorne, she said, a tentative, almost mischievous curve touching her lips. Coming from a man whose usual soundtrack is the hum of servers and the ticking of clocks. The observation, so astute, and delivered with that quiet spark, was the final straw. The carefully constructed dam of his control, already fissured and leaking, burst completely. Rational thought, consequence, the yawning chasm of their positions, it all dissolved in the face of an all-consuming primal need that roared through him, undeniable and absolute. Years of discipline, of icy isolation, crumbled into dust. The forbidden fire consumed him. He didn't speak. Words were useless, inadequate. The silence screamed louder than any declaration. He closed the remaining distance between them in one stride. He saw her breath catch, her eyes darkening, widening further, reflecting his own desperate hunger. His hand didn't hover this time. It moved with a certainty born of utter surrender. His knuckles brushed against the impossibly soft skin of her cheek, a touch so light it was almost not there, yet it sent a shock wave through both of them. He felt the warmth, the smooth texture, the slight tremor that ran through her at the contact. His thumb traced the elegant line of her jaw, his gaze locked onto hers, the icy blue now a turbulent sea of raw, undisguised wanting. Her lips parted on a soft involuntary gasp. He saw the pulse leap wildly in her throat. The scent of her intensified, flooding his senses, vanilla, sunshine, and the intoxicating unique fragrance of her arousal. The air crackled, thick and heavy, charged with the electricity of their suspended breath. His hand slid back, fingers sinking into the thick silk of her braid, where it rested over her shoulder. The weight of it, the cool vital texture against his palm, was a revelation. He felt her lean infinitesimally into his touch, a silent surrender that mirrored his own. Then the final barrier fell. His head bent, drawn by an irresistible gravity. His other hand came up to cradle the back of her head, fingers tangling gently in the roots of her hair. He saw her eyes flutter shut, a heartbeat before his lips met hers. It wasn't gentle. It was a collision, ice meeting fire, control yielding to chaos, a lifetime of restraint shattering in a single devastating point of contact. The taste of her was a shock, sweet, warm, utterly intoxicating. Her lips were softer than anything he could have imagined, yielding yet responsive. A low groan escaped him, torn from some deep untouched place within, vibrating against her mouth. She responded instantly, not with hesitation, but with a matching hunger that ignited his blood. Her hands, which had been resting limply on the keys, flew up, not to push him away, but to grasp the lapels of his suit jacket, anchoring herself as the world tilted. Her mouth opened under his, inviting, demanding. The kiss deepened, a desperate exploration, a claiming. The piano bench was forgotten. They were adrift in a sensory void, where only touch, taste, and scent existed. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her up and against him. She felt perfect in his embrace, slender yet strong, warm and pliant. The soft curves of her body pressed against the hard planes of his, a fusion of contrasts that felt like coming home to a place he'd never known. His hands roamed her back, feeling the play of muscle beneath the thin cotton of her dress, sliding down to the dip of her waist, the swell of her hip, relearning the landscape of a woman he'd catalogued from afar for torturous weeks. Her fingers were in his hair, tugging slightly, sending jolts of pure sensation down his spine. Her kisses were as demanding as his, a counterpoint of fire that matched his own desperate hunger. The taste of her, the feel of her, the small breathless sounds she made against his lips, it was overwhelming, all-consuming. The sterile penthouse, the rain-lashed city beyond the glass, the ticking chronometer, they ceased to exist. There was only this, the heat, the frantic beating of their hearts pressed together, the slide of silk and cotton, the desperate wordless language of their mouths and hands. He broke the kiss only to trail his lips along the sensitive line of her jaw, down the column of her throat, feeling the frantic pulse beneath his mouth. She arched into him with a gasp, her head falling back, offering more. Her skin tasted like sunlight and salt. His name escaped her lips on a ragged sigh, Elias, the first time she'd ever spoken it, and the sound shattered what little remained of his rational mind. He lifted her easily, her legs instinctively wrapping around his waist. He carried her away from the piano, away from the cold, geometric lines of his world, towards the deep shadows of the living area near the vast windows. The city lights below were a blurred tapestry of gold and white, indifferent witnesses to the private cataclysm unfolding high above. He lowered her onto the thick, luxurious rug, its texture alien beneath his knees. The rain streaked the windows, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow across her face, her body. He looked down at her, her eyes wide and dark, luminous with desire and a dazed wonder. Her lips were swollen from his kisses, her breathing ragged. The simple cotton dress was rumpled, revealing the smooth slope of her shoulder, the enticing shadow between her breasts. In that suspended moment, kneeling above her, the enormity of what he'd done, what he was about to do, threatened to crash over him. The power imbalance, the potential consequences, the sheer recklessness of it. But then she reached up, her hand trembling slightly as she traced the hard line of his jaw, her touch a benediction, an absolution. Her eyes held no fear, only a mirror of his own consuming need, and a profound trusting acceptance. Any last vestige of resistance dissolved. The fire had won. The fortress was not just breached, it was utterly consumed. He lowered himself over her, his body covering hers, a shield and a demand. His mouth found hers again, and the world outside the circle of their shared heat, their desperate touch, ceased to matter. The storm within had broken, and they were swept away in the flood. The only sounds now were the drumming rain, the ragged symphony of their breathing, and the silent, irrevocable shattering of every boundary that had once defined Elias Thorne. The fire had taken hold, and it promised only annihilation or rebirth.
Chapter 4. Elias Thorne woke to an alien sensation. Warmth. Not the clinical warmth of the climate control, but a living, breathing heat pressed along the length of his back. A soft weight rested on his hip. The scent that filled his nostrils wasn't ozone or polish, but a complex, intoxicating blend. Vanilla, sunshine, the faint salt of skin, the musk of sleep, and beneath it all, the uniquely her scent, Amara. His eyes flew open, adjusting to the pre-dawn gloom filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his bedroom. The city lights were fading embers below. He lay utterly still, the silence profound, yet vibrating with a new energy. The relentless ticking of the chronometer in the living area was absent, drowned out by the soft rhythmic sound of Amara's breathing beside him. Her arm was draped over his waist, her face nestled against the space between his shoulder blades, her braid a dark spill across his pillow and her own. The smooth, warm silk of her skin against his back was a revelation, a tangible anchor to the seismic shift of the previous night. Memory flooded back, the shattering of control, the desperate heat, the feel of her yielding and demanding beneath him. the raw, unfiltered connection that had consumed them both. It hadn't been a dream. The fortress had fallen. Carefully, so as not to wake her, he shifted onto his back. The movement caused her arm to slide slightly, her hand coming to rest loosely on his chest. He looked down at her. In sleep, the quiet watchfulness was gone, replaced by a profound peace. Her long lashes fanned against the rich mahogany of her cheeks. Her lips, slightly parted, looked impossibly soft. The vulnerability he'd glimpsed before was now fully exposed, a sacred trust placed in his hands. A surge of emotion, vast and terrifyingly tender, tightened his throat. It was awe, possessiveness, and a bone-deep protectiveness that felt entirely new. He lifted a hand, his calloused fingers hovering just above her cheekbone, tracing the air over the elegant line of her jaw without touching. Mine, the primal thought echoed, but tempered now with a reverence that felt equally fundamental. The sterile perfection of his bedroom looked different in this gray light. The stark black and gray sheets were tangled, testament to the storm that had passed. Amara's simple cotton dress lay discarded near the door, a splash of summer wheat against the dark floor. His own suit jacket was flung over a chair. It looked like the discarded skin of his former self. The air tasted different, alive, charged with their shared breath, the scent of their joining. The impenetrable fortress was now a shared sanctuary, irrevocably altered. He must have dozed. When he woke again, weak morning sun was painting stripes across the bed. Amara was watching him, her dark eyes soft, unguarded, holding a depth of understanding that stole his breath. A faint blush colored her cheeks as their gazes locked, but she didn't look away. Her hand was still on his chest, her thumb making a small unconscious circle over his sternum. "Morning," she murmured, her voice husky with sleep. The simple word, spoken in the intimacy of his bed, resonated through him. "Morning," he echoed, his own voice rough. He covered her hand on his chest with his own, the contact sending a fresh wave of warmth through him, different from the previous night's fire, but no less potent. He saw the faint marks on her shoulder, the slight redness at the base of her throat, souvenirs of his unleashed hunger. A flicker of possessiveness warred with a pang of concern. "Did I?" He couldn't finish the sentence, the vulnerability of the question startling him. A small, knowing smile touched her lips. She understood. "You were thorough, Mr. Thorne," she said, her eyes glinting with a spark of mischief that was entirely new between them. "But I believe I held my own." She shifted closer, her body aligning with his under the sheets, her warmth seeping into him. "Though perhaps next time, the rug isn't the most practical choice. My back feels like it tangoed with a filing cabinet." The dry observation, delivered with that quiet humor, surprised a choked sound from him, almost a laugh. He pulled her closer, burying his face in the curve of her neck, breathing her in. "Vanilla, sunshine, Amara." "Noted," he murmured against her skin, the vibration making her shiver slightly. "The bed possesses superior ergonomics." He lifted his head, meeting her gaze again. The unspoken hung heavy. There will be a next time, many next times. The days that followed were a revelation, a slow motion reshaping of reality. Elias moved through his world with a different kind of intensity. The cold focus remained, but it was now channeled, laser-like, towards ensuring Amara's presence wasn't just tolerated, but integrated, protected. He dismantled the power imbalance with fierce practical determination. He arranged for her to receive a salary commensurate with a highly specialized personal assistant, backdated. He opened a separate account in her name, depositing a significant sum with a simple note: "For your dreams, tell me what they are." He contacted a discreet legal firm to draft a cohabitation agreement that explicitly protected her rights and assets. He didn't ask permission. He acted, driven by a primal need to secure her place beside him, to erase any lingering shadow of exploitation. The penthouse itself began a subtle metamorphosis, mirroring the thaw within its master. The starkness softened. A vibrant hand-woven throw blanket in jewel tones appeared draped over the severe black sofa, Amara's contribution,
found at a weekend market she'd dragged him to, a venture into the bustling city life below that had left him overwhelmed, but strangely exhilarated by her delight. Books appeared on the once empty shelves, volumes on botany, art history, and poetry nestled beside his austere business tomes and art books. Music, real music, not just the hum of servers, sometimes filled the air, Amara playing simple melodies on the piano, or soft jazz drifting from hidden speakers. The scent of ozone was gradually replaced by the aroma of coffee brewing properly in the espresso machine she'd tended, and sometimes, the warm, comforting smell of something simple and nourishing simmering on the stove, a skill she revealed with quiet pride. He found himself leaving Thorne Industries earlier. The relentless drive that had fueled him for decades felt less urgent. His priorities had seismically shifted. One evening, he walked into the living area, to find Amara curled up on the sofa, the vibrant throw wrapped around her, deeply engrossed in a thick novel. The sight, her bare feet tucked under her, the focused line of her brow, the soft lamplight catching the gold flecks in her eyes, stopped him in his tracks. He felt a surge of pure contentment, so profound it was almost painful. Engrossed, he asked, leaning against the doorway, his voice softer than he'd ever heard it. She looked up, startled, then smiled, a warm welcoming curve of her lips that never failed to unravel him slightly. Just trying to decipher if this convoluted metaphor is profound or pretentious, she said, marking her page with a finger. What do you think about lilacs representing repressed societal guilt? He walked over, sinking onto the sofa beside her. I think, he said, reaching out to tuck a stray coil of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering on the warm silk of her skin, that lilacs smell like spring, and spring is generally preferable to guilt. He picked up the book, glancing at the cover. Though I confess, my expertise lies more in quarterly profit forecasts than floral symbolism. She laughed, the sound warm and rich, filling the room. A tragic gap in your otherwise formidable education, Mr. Thorne. She shifted, leaning her head against his shoulder. Perhaps I should tutor you. Start with daffodils representing misplaced optimism. He wrapped an arm around her, pulling her closer, breathing in the scent of her hair, vanilla, and something uniquely earthy and alive. Perhaps, he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. Though I find my current curriculum infinitely more compelling. His hand traced idle patterns on her arm through the soft blanket, and less likely to give me a headache. The greenhouse became their shared sanctuary. Elias, who had never nurtured anything beyond his own empire, found a strange quiet satisfaction in helping Amara tend her burgeoning jungle. He learned the difference between succulents and ferns, the precise watering needs of the orchid she'd replaced the gardenia with now thriving on his desk, and the surprising joy of seeing a new leaf unfurl. He'd stand behind her as she pruned, his hands resting lightly on her hips, his chin on her shoulder, simply breathing in the humid green-scented air, and the warmth of her presence. It was a form of meditation, a grounding counterpoint to the high-stakes world he still commanded. Careful, she murmured, one afternoon, guiding his hand as he attempted to repot a delicate fern. Too much pressure and you'll crush the roots. Gentle, Elias. Her use of his first name, still relatively new, sent a familiar jolt through him, a potent mix of possessiveness and tenderness. Gentle isn't typically in my operational lexicon, he admitted, his voice low near her ear, carefully easing the root ball into the fresh soil. Force, precision, control, these I understand. She leaned back slightly against him, her head tilting to look up at him. Her eyes held amusement and a deeper understanding. Sometimes, control means knowing when to be gentle, she said softly, when to let things breathe. She reached up, brushing a smudge of soil from his cheekbone with her thumb. The touch was casual, intimate. See, you're learning. The fern appreciates it. He captured her hand, turning it to press a kiss into her palm, tasting the faint earthiness on her skin. Perhaps I have an excellent teacher, he conceded, his gaze holding hers. The unspoken communication flowed effortlessly now. Desire, affection, profound connection. The greenhouse, filled with thriving life, felt like a metaphor for what was blooming between them. The understated crescendos came not in grand declarations, but in quiet moments that resonated with the depth of their transformation. One evening, Elias returned from an unavoidable grueling late meeting. The penthouse was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of table lamps. He found Amara asleep on the sofa in the living area. Her novel slipped from her fingers onto the vibrant throw, her breathing deep and even. She looked peaceful, vulnerable. The fierce protectiveness that had become his constant companion surged. He didn't wake her. Instead, with movements that were surprisingly tender for a man known for his imposing strength, he carefully slid one arm under her knees and the other behind her shoulders. She stirred slightly, murmuring incoherently, her head lolling against his chest. He lifted her easily, cradling her against him. She felt slight, yet immeasurably precious. Her arm instinctively curled around his neck, her face nuzzling into the hollow of his throat with a sleepy sigh of absolute trust. He carried her through the softly lit penthouse, past the gleaming kitchen, where her mug sat beside his espresso cup on the counter, past the study where the white orchid glowed in the desk lamp's light. He carried her to their bedroom, the room that no longer felt like just his, and laid her gently on the bed. He pulled the covers over her, brushing a stray coil of hair from her forehead. She didn't fully wake, but her lips curved in a faint, contented smile as she burrowed into the pillow. He stood watching her sleep, the city's distant glow painting her features in soft light and shadow. The act, carrying her, protecting her rest, felt more profound than any contract signed, any deal closed. It was a silent vow, a testament to the man he had become because of her. The controlled titan had discovered the profound power of tenderness. Another moment came weeks later. Elias sat at his desk in the study late one afternoon, not working, but staring at a single framed photograph he'd retrieved from a locked drawer. It was a picture of himself from nearly 20 years ago, younger, harder, his eyes icy and remote even then, standing before the skeletal frame of his first major construction project. It was a portrait of ambition untempered by humanity, of the fortress under construction. He felt her presence before he saw her. Amara stood in the doorway, having finished her tasks. Her gaze went from the photograph in his hands to his face. She didn't speak, simply walked into the room. She approached his desk, stopping beside his chair. Her hand rested lightly on his shoulder, a warm grounding weight. Then, slowly, she reached out and covered the hand holding the photograph with her own. Her touch was gentle, understanding. He looked up at her, the ghosts of his younger self reflected in his eyes, the isolation, the driven coldness. A different man, he said, his voice rough. Her thumb stroked the back of his hand over the knuckles, a silent reassurance. The man who built the fortress, she said softly, her gaze holding his with unwavering compassion, but not the man who lives here now. Her other hand came up, her fingers tracing the line where tension still sometimes etched itself beside his mouth. This man, she whispered, leaning down slightly, her breath warm against his skin. I like this man much better. He turned his hand beneath hers, intertwining their fingers. He brought their joined hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles, then turned his head to press another kiss into the palm resting on his shoulder. He didn't need words. The gesture, the acceptance in her eyes, the profound connection that flowed between them in the quiet study, it was the culmination of their journey. The fortress had been breached, not by force, but by the quiet persistence of life, warmth, and an unexpected all-consuming love. The sterile lines had blurred, replaced by the vibrant, sometimes messy, infinitely richer landscape of a shared life. The controlled, powerful individual had been reshaped, not diminished, but deepened, by the pure, unexpected love of the woman who had taught him how to breathe. The stillness now held not emptiness, but the profound resonant peace of a bond that had consumed and transformed them both. The storm had passed, leaving only fertile ground, bathed in sunlight.